Hey, I'm Mechanical Engineer, and this is my gun rack. A standalone rifle rack is a super cool and space-saving way to store your airsoft pellets or even real rifles. Plus, it offers plenty of extra space to store BBs, pellets, or really anything else. And although I'll be building it with my BB gun in mind, the rack will be plenty large enough to hold real rifles as well. I built my whole rack out of 3/4 inch pine and 3/4 inch pine plywood, but you can of course use whatever you want. So enough talk, let's jump into it. In this video, I will not be showing very much, if any, sanding, but keep in mind that everything has to be sanded. Now this is a rough diagram of what I'm hoping to build. On the left side of the unit is the gun rack itself, which can hold up to 5 rifles. And then on the right side, we have some shelves and a small lockable door at the bottom. And then of course, all the dimensions are on the sides. So now that you have a basic idea of what we're aiming for, let's go ahead and get started. We'll start by building the shelving column itself. To do this, we'll first cut 2 pieces out of our 3/4 inch ply that are 33 inches tall and 10 inches wide. Just like this. Now we're going to want to decide how far apart we want our shelves to be. The shelves themselves are going to be 3/4 of an inch thick, so keep that in mind when you're calculating the spacing for where you want the shelves to go. You can of course go with whatever design you want, but for me, I think I'm going to have 2 shelves 8 inches apart. Once you've decided where you want your shelves to be, we'll go ahead and take the router and cut out channels for the shelves to slide into. We'll want the channels to be 1/4 inch deep and of course 3/4 inch wide. And we'll cut these channels on the inside of both cabinet pieces. Like this. Now we'll just do a quick check to make sure they line up okay, and it looks good. Next, I'm going to use a 3/4 of an inch pine board to build 2 square frames to hold these 2 sides together. The frames will need to be 10 inches long by 8.5 inches wide. And it's not nearly as important, but I'm probably going to cut my frames down to be about 1.5 inches tall. Like these. And as you can see, I just screwed these together. I did not use any glue, and the reason for that is because I'm going to have to take these apart in order to put the cabinet together. Let me explain. We're going to want to screw these down to the top and bottom of both of our side pieces. But since the frame is too small for a standard drill to fit in, we're going to have to break it in half in order to screw it down. I like to take it apart like this, because this way you can just back the frame up to the very edge of the side of the board and then screw it down. So now that you know what we're going to do, let's go ahead and put it all together. Now we can put the 2 sides together and screw them in place. Next, we're going to cut out 2 pieces out of our 3/4 inch pine boards. They're going to be 32 inches by 3 inches. We'll then cut out another 2 pieces out of the same board. Only these 2 pieces will be 22 inches by 1.5 inches. Once we have all 4 boards cut out, we'll take the smaller boards and attach them to the bottom corner of the larger boards. Like this. And as you can see, the 2 pieces are not built identically. They actually mirror each other. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these smaller pieces on the inside bottom and we're going to mount them to the front and back of the cabinet. I know last time we drilled into the frame we had to take the cabinet apart, but since these boards are so thin, we should be able to work around that by just drilling in at an angle from both sides. Now we're going to want to build one more arm very similar to one of the bottom arms, only this arm is going to go on the top and it's going to hold the rifles in place. So just like the bottom ones, we're going to cut out 3/4 inch board that is 32 inches by 3 inches. We'll now cut out a second board, but unlike the boards for the previous arms, this one is going to be 22 inches by 3 inches. Now if you look at the second board, you'll see I've drawn triangles 2 inches apart from each other. These are going to be the notches that the rifle's barrels fall into. And although I did draw the triangles very pointy, I'm going to do my best to round off the edges when I cut it out. Just like this. We'll then secure this to the top front of the back arm, and then mount the arm to the back of the cabinet. But when mounting it, make sure you mount it 3/4 of an inch taller than the cabinet itself. That way we'll have a hole for the countertop to drop into. Next, we'll cut out the side panel for the other end of the cabinet, like this one. We'll now draw a line on the side panel, starting from the front of the top arm, going to the top of the bottom arm, like this. And once we have it marked, we can go ahead and cut it out. And although it is not entirely necessary, if you are using plywood for your side panel like I am, I find it best to cut the front and top 3/4 of an inch short and then apply a face to it. I do this for no other reason except that I think it looks better. But regardless of what you decide to do, once the side panel is done, we can go ahead and screw it on. Next, we'll cut out the cabinet top and secure it in place. The best way I find to do this is to drill upwards from the front and back of the frame. With the top now on, we can cut out a backing for the cabinet and glue and nail that in place. cut out shelves and nail them in place. And then drop in the base of the cabinet and screw it in place from the bottom up. We'll also cut out the base for where the rifles will stand, and we'll screw that in place just like we did for the other one. Now if we drop a rifle onto the rack, you'll see that the rifle can wave back and forth. This is something that we're going to need to stop. So I cut out a board that is 5 inches by 22 inches, which is the same length as the rack itself. And then very similar to the top of the rack, I then drew spaces that are 2 inches apart from each other and 3.5 inches long. And like before, when cutting this out, it would be best if you could round out these edges a little bit and make it more of a horseshoe shape rather than a rectangle. Or you could ignore everything I just said and make them square. Free country. But once it's cut out, we can glue and nail it down 1.5 inches from the front, holes facing forward. We'll now put a face on the rest of the cabinet. And build and mount the door. For a door, I'm just using a piece of plywood that I built a frame around. And one last thing, I'm going to use this small stack of nails as a spacer to make sure there's just a little bit of air on every side so the door can freely swing. So now I'll nail on a door stop so the door doesn't swing in too far. And attach the lock. This is the lock that I'll be using. It's super cool because it has this hinge that swings over onto the lock that'll be on the door, and then you have the set of keys to lock it. I picked it up at Home Depot for only $7, but it feels like it's very well made. Now there's only 2 things left to do. First, we'll stain it. And now all that's left to do is to glue on some felt to the top and bottom crevices of the gun rack to protect the rifles from being scuffed or scratched. I used turbo tacky glue that I got at Home Depot for this, and it worked beautifully. And with that, your rifle rack is now complete and ready for rifles. It actually looks really good with that felt. And if I grab my largest BB gun, you guys can see that it just pops right in place. I love how this turned out. It can hold up to 5 rifles, has plenty of storage along the side, plus it has a small lockable compartment where you can keep your valuables. And if you want to keep real rifles on this, all you'd have to do to install a cable lock is drill a hole on each side. Because if you use the same dimensions that I did, this rack should be big enough to hold almost any rifle. And there you have it, my standalone rifle rack. But hey, thank you so much for you guys watching. I hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did, please feel free to hit the thumbs up and subscribe. And Lord willing, I'll see you next Friday.
Thanks for watching, and please feel free to subscribe.